Interestingly, even at that point, he was not all that opposed to psychiatry. In the early 50s, he was not coming out and saying that psychiatry was bad, psychiatry was wrong, psychiatrists are evil. In the Dianetics book, for example, he writes that Dianetics is the enemy of none. He clearly sees a role for psychiatrists in the sort of grand ecosystem of the world. His war against psychiatry did not start until spring of 1955, and you can trace it back very specifically. At that point, he starts talking about psychiatry in a very sort of devaluing way. And later that year, he started to write letters to the FBI, linking psychiatrists to the Internal Revenue Service, to communists, to secret LSD attacks against Scientologists. The FBI agent in receipt of some of these letters quite famously wrote "appears mental" and filed it away. But these were very, very sort of dramatic letters that were well beyond the sort of McCarthyist normalcy even at the time. He finally lowered the boom formally September 30th, 1955 in a professional auditor's bulletin. And here he does a lot of tricks. Scientology is the only Anglo-Saxon development, i.e. Psychiatry is a bunch of money-grubbing Jews. Yet he also compares psychiatry to doing business with Hitler, which is a little bit confusing. But just really comes out hard against psychiatry. And this psychiatrist was sort of the formal declaration of war, basically, September 30th, 1955. He follows up with some more tricks in 1956. He starts talking about how to ruin them. So it's not just about opposing the ideas of psychiatry, it's about ruining specific psychiatrists. He develops the idea that psychiatry is what he calls an appropriation racket, and you'll see this theme all the way through to the current day, whereby psychiatry is seen as a way to make money and people being in it just for the money. And he also identifies psychiatrists as a perpetual enemy. Basically, sort of hardwires us into the sort of universe as the enemy from trillions and trillions of years ago. They're what he called whole-track psychiatrists in the past that messed around with the galaxy a long time ago. So we have played a very harsh role in a lot of bad things for a long, long time. But why did he do this? What's going on here? Here is part of the answer, and I don't know if you remember from 2005, Tom Cruise getting up in front of Matt Lauer and saying, "You don't know the history of psychiatry, I do." He unwittingly actually brought forth a very interesting point, and it's sort of why L. Ron Hubbard, I think, was triggered to start this war. But promazine was the first antipsychotic medication that was ever synthesized and sold, and it came out in late 1954. It was the drug that started to empty the asylums, which at that point had been bursting at the seams. Psychiatry did not have treatment for schizophrenia or any kind of psychotic mental illness until that point, other than basically sedating people. So this was a radical change in the treatment of the severely and institutionalized mentally ill. And L. Ron Hubbard's life would get a lot worse the following year. That was when meprobamate, or Miltown, was introduced. This is not a drug that's used anymore today, generally, but it was introduced in the spring of 1955. And you can see how its sales in America just boomed in that year. Those are huge numbers for medicine back then. Meprobamate, the deal with meprobamate is it was the first ever psychiatric medicine that was appropriate and designed for the average ambulatory person. The person with a job, the person with a family, the person who gets stressed out on a day-to-day basis, the person who's having trouble managing his or her life. It's not something that one would take for severe mental illness. This was the first populist psychiatric medicine, the first populist minor tranquilizer in the world, and it exploded. No drug has ever come onto the market and had a greater and faster impact than meprobamate did in the winter of 55 to 56. And Hubbard was in California at the time, and the epicenter of this huge boom, of course, was Hollywood and Los Angeles. The public gobbled meprobamate up. This is all these expressions. They were all over the popular magazines at the time. They were all over the newspapers at the time. There were lineups down the street at pharmacists looking for this stuff. It wasn't just the public, it was the scientific community as well. People were very excited about this. Psychiatry and the treatment of mental health with pills was all of a sudden popularized for the masses, and people were thinking, wow, you know, what a great future we're going to have. Tranquilizers are the answer. It, again, was ubiquitous in society. And to gall Hubbard even further, the celebrity acceptance was absolutely monumental. That's Milton Berle, the most popular performer on television at the time, who was publicly speculating they might even change his name. Hubbard had already started to court a number of celebrities at that point unsuccessfully. And Milltown basically just usurped all of his efforts and rubbed his nose in it. And so the history of chlorpromazine first, then Milltown second, played a huge role in our story. Another thread is that Hubbard had always, from day one, identified himself and believed himself to be a scientist. He wrote science fiction. He tried to study engineering. He tried to publish Dianetics as a science of mental health in mainstream scientific journals. He signed his name erroneously and fraudulently on a number of works that he did as CE, civil engineer, PhD, or nuclear physicist. Even as Scientology moved into the realm of the religious, he identified it as precise and exact and part of the science age. This is really important to L. Ron Hubbard. What happened was in 1954, to survive again, he moved Scientology into formal religion. So Scientology actually existed for 2 years before it became a religion, and there's a lot of different reasons why he did that, but he had to, and I submit to you that he really had to choke down his self-styled essence as a scientist in order to make that happen, and I think it was a gross humiliation for a guy who had really never been religious in his life before. And coupled with that, at the exact same time, in late 54 to 1956 was basically the origins of the pharmacological revolution in psychiatry, just rubbing him. And I think psychologically he was not able to deal with these things, and he needed an enemy. He had rage, he had paranoia, and the rest is history.